My name is Meredith. I'm 33 years old. And 6 months ago, I found a shoebox in my dead grandmother's basement with the words, "Burn this," written across the lid in her handwriting. Inside that box was a birth certificate, my birth certificate. And the name listed under Mother was not the woman who raised me. It was a woman I'd been forbidden to ask about my entire life. A woman whose photograph I'd found once as a teenager, a woman who looked so much like me it made my stomach drop. A woman named Colleen. But what my parents didn't know was that my grandmother had spent 30 years making sure the truth would survive them. She'd hidden everything, letters, documents, photographs, in the one place she knew they'd never look. And she'd left instructions in her will to make sure I'd be the one to find it. That shoebox didn't just change what I knew about my family. It rebuilt me from the ground up. It answered questions I'd been carrying since childhood and raised new ones I'm still learning to live with. Before I go any further, if you find this story worth hearing, I'd love for you to subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now and what time is it where you are? I always read them. Now let me take you back to the very beginning, to a house in a small town in Ohio, where I grew up believing I was simply the child nobody wanted to love. I grew up in Kellerton, Ohio, a town so small that everyone knew your last name before you finished introducing yourself. We lived on Birch Lane in a 2-story colonial with green shutters and a wraparound porch that my father repainted every spring. From the outside, we looked like every other family on the block. 2 parents, 2 kids, a dog named Baxter who slept on the porch swing. The kind of house people drove past and thought, that's nice. But inside that house, there were 2 different childhoods happening under the same roof. My father, Gerald, was a structural engineer for a construction firm in Columbus. He commuted an hour each way 5 days a week, and when he came home, he was tired in a way that went deeper than muscles. He'd walk through the front door, drop his keys on the counter, and the first thing he'd do every single time was look for my brother.
Where's Derek?
Not, where are the kids? Not, how was everyone's day? Just Derek. Derek was 2 years older than me. He had my father's jawline, my father's dark brown eyes, my father's way of standing with his hands in his pockets like the world owed him a little patience. They were carbon copies of each other, and my father loved that. He loved it the way some men love looking in a mirror and seeing the best version of themselves reflected back. They'd throw a baseball in the backyard until the sun went down. My father coached Derek's Little League team for 6 straight years. He drove Derek to basketball practice, to swim meets, to fishing trips up at Lake Erie on Saturday mornings. I'd hear them leave before dawn, the truck engine rumbling, Derek's laughter fading down the driveway, and I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it felt like to be wanted that badly. I wasn't mistreated. I want to be clear about that. I was fed, clothed, sent to school with a packed lunch. My father never hit me, never screamed at me. He just didn't see me. I was furniture. I was the girl who happened to live in the same house as his son. When he sat at the dinner table, his eyes would move from Derek to my mother and back, like I was a gap between 2 things that mattered. My mother, Patrice, was different, but not in the way you might hope. She was soft-spoken, careful with her words, the kind of woman who ironed pillowcases and kept fresh flowers on the kitchen windowsill. She loved me. I believe that now, even though it took me decades to understand what her love actually looked like, because her love came wrapped in silence. She never corrected my father when he forgot my school concerts. She never said,
"Gerald, Meredith has a recital tonight?"
or,
"Gerald, you haven't asked her about her grades."
She'd just look at me with these sad, wet eyes like she was apologizing without moving her lips, and then turn back to whatever she was stirring on the stove. Once when I was about 8, I came downstairs after hearing my father read Derek a bedtime story. I stood in the hallway in my pajamas and asked, "Daddy, can you read to me too?" He looked at me for what felt like a full minute. Then he said,
Ask your mother.
And closed Derek's door. I went to my room and read to myself. I got very good at reading to myself. The one person who made me feel like I wasn't invisible was my grandmother Estelle. She was my mother's mother, a tall woman with silver hair she wore in a low bun and hands that always smelled like lavender and flour. She lived about 40 minutes away in a little bungalow on Maple Ridge Road, and every other weekend she'd drive to our house and take me out for the day. Just me, never Derek. That used to confuse me. Derek would ask to come, and Grandma Estelle would smile and say,
"Not today, sweetheart. Today is Meredith's day."
My father would roll his eyes, my mother would look away, and Grandma Estelle would take my hand and walk me to her car like she was rescuing me from something nobody else could see. We'd go to the diner on 5th Street and share a stack of blueberry pancakes. She'd take me to the library and let me pick 5 books instead of 2. She'd drive me past the old covered bridge on County Road 9 and tell me stories about when she was young, about growing up on a farm, about her husband Walter, who died before I was born, about how life doesn't always give you what you want, but it always gives you what you need if you're paying attention. She never talked about my parents. She never said a bad word about Gerald. But sometimes when she dropped me off and watched me walk back into that house, I'd turn around and catch something on her face, something tight and fierce and sad, like she was swallowing words that would burn if she let them out. One afternoon, I must have been 9 or 10, I was sitting on her kitchen floor, coloring while she baked. I looked up and said, "Grandma, why doesn't Daddy love me like he loves Derek?" She stopped. She didn't turn around right away. I could see her hands go still on the counter, the rolling pin frozen mid-press. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were wet.
Meredith,
She said quietly, kneeling down to my level.
some people have small hearts. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. And one day when you're ready, I'm going to make sure you understand exactly why.
I didn't know what that meant. I was a kid. I just wanted my father to come to my soccer game, but I remembered those words, every single one, because Grandma Estelle wasn't the kind of woman who said things she didn't mean. She said, "When you're ready." She said, "I'm going to make sure." That wasn't a comfort, that was a promise. And it took me 20 years to realize she'd already started keeping it. The summer I turned 14, I found the photograph. It was a Saturday in July, the kind of thick, humid Ohio afternoon where the air sticks to your skin and even the crickets sound tired. I was at Grandma Estelle's house, helping her organize the spare bedroom she'd been meaning to clean out for years. She was in the kitchen making lemonade, and I was sorting through boxes of old linens, Christmas decorations, and photo albums that smelled like dust and mothballs. The photograph was tucked inside an envelope, wedged between 2 pages of a leather-bound album I'd never seen before. It wasn't labeled. There was no date on the back. But the image stopped me cold. A young woman, maybe early 20s, sat in a rocking chair holding a newborn baby. She was smiling, not the posed camera-ready smile people put on for holidays, but the kind of smile that comes from somewhere so deep inside you it barely reaches your mouth. She had dark auburn hair, the same shade mine turned in the fall. She had my cheekbones, my chin, my slightly crooked nose that I'd always hated because nobody else in my family had it. She looked like me. Not a little, not in a vague, "oh, I can see a resemblance" kind of way. She looked like someone had taken my face and placed it 30 years in the past. I carried the photograph to the kitchen, holding it carefully by the edges like it might dissolve if I gripped too hard. "Grandma, who is this?" Estelle was pouring lemonade into 2 tall glasses. She turned, saw the photograph, and everything in her face changed. It was subtle. If you didn't know her, you might have missed it. But I saw the glass tilt slightly in her hand, saw the lemonade splash over the rim onto the counter. She set the pitcher down slowly and wiped her hands on her apron.
Where did you find that?
She asked, not angry, not surprised, just careful. "In the photo album, the leather one in the back of the closet." She took the photograph from my hands and looked at it for a long time. Her thumb traced the edge of the woman's face, and I watched something move across her expression, grief, tenderness, and something else I couldn't name at 14, but now recognize as guilt.
That's your Aunt Colleen.
She said softly.
She loved you more than anything in this world.
I blinked. My aunt, I didn't know Mom had a sister. Grandma Estelle hesitated. I could see the war happening behind her eyes, the part of her that wanted to tell me everything fighting against the part of her that knew I was too young, that it wasn't time, that opening that door would bring down the whole house.
Colleen was special.
Estelle said finally.
She was your mother's older sister. She passed away a long time ago.
How come nobody ever talks about her?
Some losses are too heavy to carry out loud, sweetheart.
She handed the photograph back to me, then gently steered the conversation toward the lemonade, the weather, whether I wanted to walk down to the creek later. Classic Grandma Estelle, smooth as riverstone, warm as July, and absolutely immovable when she decided a conversation was over. But I kept the photograph. She didn't ask for it back, and I slipped it between the pages of the book I was reading that week, a paperback copy of Little Women I'd picked up from her shelf. I think she saw me do it. I think she let me. When my mother came to pick me up that evening, I was sitting on the porch steps with Grandma Estelle watching fireflies. Patrice got out of the car, and I foolishly, innocently, with no idea what I was about to detonate, said, "Mom, how come you never told me you had a sister named Colleen?" The air changed. I felt it. Patrice stopped walking mid-step, 1 foot on the gravel, 1 on the grass, like someone had pressed pause on her body. Her face went from tired after work to something I'd never seen before, white, rigid, terrified.
Who told you that name?
Her voice was flat, not a question, a demand. I found a photo at Grandma's, she said.
Don't.
Patrice held up her hand.
Don't ever mention that name in this house again. Do you understand me, Meredith? Not in this house. Not to your father, not to anyone.
I looked at Grandma Estelle. She was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. She didn't defend me. She didn't argue. She just gave me the smallest nod, so slight I might have imagined it like she was saying, not now, but soon. Patrice drove me home in silence. When we walked through the front door, Gerald was in the living room watching a baseball game with Derek. He glanced up, probably expecting Patrice to say something about dinner. Instead, my mother said to no one to the air to the ceiling.
She found a photograph.
Gerald turned. For the first time in my 14 years of life, my father looked directly at me. Not through me, not past me, not at the space I happened to occupy. He looked at me. And the expression on his face was not love, not curiosity, not even anger. It was fear. He stared at me for 4, maybe 5 seconds. Then he stood up, walked past me without a word, and went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close. I heard the lock turn.
What did you do, Ek?
Derek looked at me from the couch, confused. Nothing, I said. I just asked about a photograph. But it wasn't nothing. I knew that already, even at 14. Whatever that photograph meant, whatever Colleen meant, it was the thing that lived underneath everything. Underneath my father's coldness, my mother's guilt, my grandmother's quiet promises. It was the reason I'd always felt like a secret, rather than a daughter. I went to my room that night and taped the photograph to the inside cover of my journal. I didn't know who Colleen really was. I didn't know why my parents were so afraid of her memory. I didn't know that the baby in her arms was me. But I knew one thing, with absolute certainty, I was not who they told me I was. Years later, I would learn that Colleen wasn't just my aunt, and the baby in that photograph wasn't just any baby. It was me. After the photograph incident, something shifted in our house. It was like I'd accidentally bumped a wall and revealed a crack that everyone had been carefully wallpapering over for years. Nobody mentioned Colleen again. Nobody acknowledged what had happened that evening. But the silence got heavier, and the distance between me and my parents, especially Gerald, grew wider in ways I could feel but couldn't name. I responded the only way I knew how. I tried harder. By 15, I was pulling straight A's in every class. By 16, I joined the debate team, the volunteer club, the school newspaper. I tutored younger students in math on Tuesday afternoons and spent Saturday mornings at the community center helping organize food drives. I wasn't passionate about all of it. I was desperate. I thought if I could just be good enough, accomplished enough, visible enough, my father would finally turn his head and see me the way he saw Derek. Derek, meanwhile, didn't have to try. He was a natural athlete, varsity baseball, by sophomore year, broad-shouldered and easy-smiled, the kind of kid teachers liked, even when he didn't do the reading. Gerald went to every single one of his games. He'd wear Derek's team jersey over his work shirt and sit in the front row of the bleachers with a cooler of sodas and a grin so wide you'd think his son was pitching in the World Series. I went to one of Derek's games once, hoping to sit next to my father. I showed up early, saved the seat beside me. When Gerald arrived, he looked at me, looked at the seat, and said,
I'm going to sit with the other dads.
Then he walked to the opposite end of the bleachers. I sat there for 9 innings, alone. The divide became impossible to ignore when we both turned 16, Derek first, then me, 5 months later. For Derek's 16th birthday, Gerald bought him a used Ford pickup truck. Navy blue, freshly waxed with a red bow on the hood. The whole family stood in the driveway while Derek climbed in and revved the engine. Gerald had his arm around Patrice, beaming like he'd just handed his son the keys to the world. 5 months later, on my 16th birthday, I came downstairs to find an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a card, the generic kind you buy at the drugstore, the kind that says Happy Birthday in gold foil and nothing else. And tucked inside was a $50 bill. No note, no signature, no bow. No. Patrice made a cake. I'll give her that. She always made a cake. But Gerald didn't come home from work until after 8 that night, and when he walked through the door, he didn't mention my birthday. Not once. Derek was out with friends. The cake sat on the counter with 3 slices cut from it, mine, my mother's, and 1 Patrice wrapped in foil.
For your father for later.
He never ate it. I found it in the trash the next morning. I stopped expecting things from Gerald after that. Something inside me, not hope exactly, but whatever comes before hope, the tiny muscle that keeps reaching that thing, finally went still. I didn't cry about it. I didn't confront him. I just filed it away in the part of my brain where I kept all the evidence that I didn't belong in this family. The file was getting thick. But I kept working. Junior year, I was ranked first in my class. Senior year, I was named valedictorian. When the principal called to inform my parents, I was standing in the kitchen. Patrice answered the phone, listened, thanked him, and hung up. She looked at me with those familiar wet eyes and said,
I'm so proud of you, Meredith.
"Will you come to graduation?" I asked.
Of course.
"Will Dad come?" She didn't answer. She turned back to the sink and started washing a dish that was already clean. Graduation day arrived on a warm Friday in June. I wore a white dress under my cap and gown. I'd written my valedictorian speech in 3 drafts, memorized every word, and practiced in front of my bathroom mirror until I could deliver it without shaking. I was ready. I was terrified. I wanted someone in that audience to be proud of me. When I walked across the football field toward the stage, I scanned the bleachers. Derek wasn't there. He was at college by then and hadn't called. Gerald's seat was empty. Patrice had left a voicemail that morning.
Something came up. Your father needs me at home. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'll make it up to you.
She didn't make it up to me, but sitting in the 3rd row, right on the center aisle, wearing her best blue dress and clutching a bouquet of sunflowers, was Grandma Estelle. She was crying before I even reached the podium. After the ceremony, she held me for a long time in the parking lot while other families celebrated around us. She smelled like lavender, like always. She pulled back, held my face in both hands, and said something I've never forgotten.
You are exactly who you were meant to be, Meredith. Never forget that. Not for one single day.
Then she pressed something into my palm. It was a necklace, delicate gold, with a small oval locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a woman I now recognized. "Colleen."
This was your mother's.
Grandma Estelle said quietly. I stared at her. "Mom's, but Patrice doesn't. I've never seen her wear this." Grandma Estelle held my gaze for a long moment. Her expression was the same one I'd seen in the kitchen 2 years earlier, that wore behind her eyes. The push and pull of truth and timing.
Keep it safe.
She said.
You'll understand someday.
She didn't correct me. She didn't say, I meant Patrice. She didn't explain. She just kissed my forehead and walked me to her car and drove me to the diner on 5th Street, where we shared blueberry pancakes like we always did. Like the world outside, that diner didn't exist. 2 weeks later, I received my financial aid package from the University of Michigan, full scholarship nursing program. When I showed Gerald, he barely looked up from his newspaper.
Good.
He said.
One less mouth to feed.
I packed my bags that August. Patrice helped me carry boxes to the car. She was crying quietly the way she always cried, like she didn't want anyone to hear. At the last moment, she grabbed my wrist and whispered,
I know this family hasn't been fair to you. I know that, and I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask about Colleen, about the necklace, about the photograph, about all the silence. But she let go of my wrist and stepped back, and the moment passed like a train through a station there and then gone. Grandma Estelle had given me a necklace and called it your mother's. But Patrice was standing right there that day at graduation, and she never wore that necklace. So whose was it? I arrived at the University of Michigan on a Sunday afternoon in late August with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the feeling that I'd just been released from something I didn't have the vocabulary to describe yet. My dorm room was small. A single bed, a pressed wood desk, a window overlooking a courtyard where students were already tossing frisbees and introducing themselves with the nervous energy of people trying on new identities. I sat on the edge of that bed alone for the first time in my life in a way that felt chosen rather than imposed. And I cried. Not sad crying. Not the hollow, chest-aching crying I'd done in my bedroom on Birch Lane. This was relief. Pure physical relief, like setting down a suitcase you didn't realize was breaking your shoulder until you finally let go. The first semester was hard. Not academically, I'd been preparing for academic rigor my entire life because excellence was the only currency my family accepted from me, and even then they didn't cash it. The hard part was learning how to exist without performing, without scanning a room to see if anyone noticed me, without bracing for indifference every time I walked through a door. My roommate, a girl from Detroit named Keisha, noticed before I did. One night in October, she was lying on her bed, painting her nails, and I was at my desk, studying anatomy, and she said completely out of nowhere, Meredith, why do you apologize every time you use the microwave? I looked up. What? You said sorry 3 times today. Once when you heated up soup, once when you asked me to pass the remote, and once when you sneezed. You apologize for existing. Who taught you that? I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. But I thought about it for weeks afterward, and Keisha's question became the first small crack in the wall I'd built around myself, the wall that said I was only allowed to take up space if I earned it. Nursing school consumed me in the best possible way. I loved the precision of it, the science of the body, the idea that you could learn the exact mechanism of someone's pain and then do something about it. Anatomy made sense to me. Physiology made sense. The human body followed rules, and if you studied hard enough, you could understand why things broke and how to help fix them. It was everything my childhood wasn't logical, fair cause and effect. By my second year, I was on the dean's list. By my third, I was doing clinical rotations at Michigan Medicine and discovering that I had a talent for emergency care for staying calm when everything around me was chaos. My professors said I had unusual composure under pressure. They meant it as a compliment. I knew where it came from. During those 3 years, my phone was mostly silent. Gerald never called. Not once. Not on my birthday, not on Christmas, not when a tornado warning hit Ann Arbor and the entire campus sheltered in basements for 2 hours. Derek called once my first Thanksgiving away to ask if I was
coming home for the holidays.
When I said I was staying on campus to study, he said,
Cool more turkey for us.
And hung up. Patrice sent cards, always the same generic drugstore kind with short notes inside.
Thinking of you. Hope school is going well. Love, Mom?
No phone calls. No visits. The cards came like clockwork every few weeks, as if she'd set a reminder on her calendar to prove she hadn't completely forgotten me. But Grandma Estelle called every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon, without fail. Rain, snow, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays that she'd accidentally marked as Sunday on her calendar, and called anyway, laughing at herself when I pointed it out. We'd talk for an hour sometimes. She'd tell me about her garden, about the new recipes she'd tried, about the cardinal that kept visiting her bird feeder. I'd tell her about my classes, about the patients I was learning to care for, about how strange it felt to be somewhere people actually seemed happy to see me. And every few calls, she'd say something that I filed away without fully understanding.
I'm keeping something safe for you, Meredith. When the time is right, you'll understand.
Grandma, what do you mean?
Just trust me. Trust the timing.
I thought she was being poetic. Grandma Estelle was like that. She spoke in layered sentences that sounded like fortune cookies, but always turned out to mean something specific, something real. I didn't press her. I was 21, buried in textbooks learning to start IVs and read cardiac monitors. I didn't have the bandwidth for riddles. I graduated in May, passed my boards that summer, and was hired at a hospital in Grand Rapids. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a radiator that clanged at 3 in the morning, and I loved it because it was mine. Every corner of it was mine. That fall I met Marcus. He was a software engineer at a tech company downtown, and we met in the most unremarkable way possible, standing in line at a coffee shop, both reaching for the same sleeve of sugar packets. He apologized. I apologized. Then we both laughed because we were two strangers apologizing over sugar. Marcus was tall, quiet, and had the kind of steady presence that made rooms feel calmer just because he was in them. On our third date, he asked me about my family. Not casually, genuinely. He leaned forward and said, "Tell me about where you come from." Nobody had ever asked me that and actually wanted to hear the answer. I told him everything. The invisibility, the $50 envelopes, the empty seat at graduation, the photograph, Colleen, the necklace. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix it, without telling me it wasn't that bad, or that all families have issues. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That explains why you apologize when you use the microwave." I married Marcus 14 months later at the county courthouse. Grandma Estelle couldn't travel by then, her knees were bad, and she'd started using a walker, but she sent a card with a pressed sunflower inside, and a note that said,
He sounds like he deserves you, and you deserve everything.
My parents weren't invited. I didn't owe them that, and Marcus never questioned the decision. For 2 years, life was the quietest kind of good. I worked shifts I loved. I came home to a man who saw me. I called my grandmother every Sunday, and then on a Tuesday night in March, the phone rang at 9:15 in the evening. It was Grandma Estelle, and her voice was different, thin, urgent, like she was running out of time and knew it.
Meredith, I need you to come home. There's something in this house that belongs to you, and I won't be here much longer to protect it.
I booked a flight to Columbus that same night. Marcus drove me to the airport at 5 in the morning, kissed me at the curb, and said, "Call me when you land. I'll be right here." The flight was 90 minutes. I spent every second of it staring out the window at clouds that looked like cotton pressed flat against glass, replaying Grandma Estelle's voice in my head. She'd never called me like that before, never with that edge, that breathlessness, that sense of a clock winding down. She was 81 years old, still sharp, still funny, still the woman who could make blueberry pancakes and dismantle your entire emotional defense system in the same morning. But that night on the phone, she sounded like someone standing at the edge of something looking back.
There's something in this house that belongs to you. I won't be here much longer to protect it.
I landed in Columbus at 7:45 in the morning. I rented a car and drove straight to Kellerton, 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. I called Grandma Estelle's phone 3 times on the way. No answer. I called Patrice. No answer. I called the house line, the old landline that Grandma Estelle refused to disconnect because she said cell phones made her feel untethered, and it rang and rang and rang. By the time I pulled onto Maple Ridge Road, there was an ambulance in the driveway. I don't remember parking the car. I don't remember opening the door or walking up the porch steps. I remember a paramedic, a young woman with red hair pulled back in a ponytail, stepping out the front door and nearly colliding with me. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her granddaughter." She looked at me with the expression I'd seen 100 times on nurses' faces at the hospital, the one that says everything before the mouth catches up. "I'm sorry," she said. "She passed about 2 hours ago. It was peaceful. She was in her bed." 2 hours. I'd missed her by 2 hours. I stood on that porch for a long time. The March air was cold and smelled like wet soil and old wood. Inside, I could hear someone, a neighbor, maybe making phone calls in a low, practical voice. The ambulance lights were still flashing, painting the house in slow red pulses. Grandma Estelle died alone in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in March, 2 hours before I could reach her. She'd called me the night before because she knew. She knew her body was shutting down and she'd used her last clear evening to make sure I'd come home. Not for her, for the thing she'd been protecting. Patrice arrived an hour later. She pulled up in Gerald's sedan, her eyes already swollen, her hands shaking as she walked through the front door and saw the empty bed where her mother had been. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the bedroom and stood there, one hand on the doorframe, the other pressed against her mouth, making no sound at all. Gerald arrived after that with Derek. They stood in the living room like men at a business meeting they hadn't prepared for, uncomfortable stiff, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Gerald shook hands with the neighbor who'd found Estelle that morning. Derek scrolled through his phone. Neither of them spoke to me. The funeral was 3 days later at St. Andrew's on Chestnut Street, the church where Grandma Estelle had gone every Sunday for 50 years. The pews were full. She was loved in that town in a way that my father never understood, because Gerald measured value in what people could do for him, and Estelle measured it in what she could do for others. The service was simple. Hymns she'd chosen years ago, readings from Psalms, a eulogy delivered by the pastor who told a story about Estelle bringing homemade soup to every new family that moved onto her street for 3 decades straight. People laughed through their tears. That was Grandma Estelle. She could make you cry and smile in the same breath. Afterward, there was a gathering at the church hall. Sandwiches, coffee, quiet conversations. Gerald stood near the door, accepting condolences with the mechanical courtesy of a man fulfilling an obligation. At one point, I overheard him say to a neighbor,
She was a difficult woman, stubborn to the end, but she meant well.
I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. Stubborn. He called the woman who'd spent 30 years protecting a secret, protecting me, stubborn. Like her devotion was an inconvenience. Like her love was a character flaw. I said nothing. I stood by the coffee table with a cup I never drank and waited for the part that mattered. It came the following morning. Grandma Estelle's attorney, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Howard Calloway, gathered us in the living room of the bungalow on Maple Ridge Road. Patrice sat on the floral couch. Gerald stood by the window with his arms crossed. Derek sat in the recliner, still checking his phone. I sat in Grandma Estelle's reading chair, the one by the bookshelf where she used to sit with me on her lap when I was small. Mr. Calloway read the will in a measured, careful voice. The house and its equity went to Patrice and Gerald, no surprise there. A small savings account was split between Derek and me. Some jewelry went to Patrice. Some books went to the church library. And then Mr. Calloway paused, adjusted his glasses, and read the final clause. The contents of the basement storage room belong solely to my granddaughter, Meredith Ann Walsh. No family member is to enter, remove, or disturb any item in that room before Meredith has had the opportunity to retrieve them personally. This is my explicit and final wish. The room went silent.
What's in the basement?
Gerald uncrossed his arms. Mr. Calloway looked at him over his glasses. The will does not specify, only that the contents belong to Meredith.
Did you know about this?
Gerald turned to Patrice. Patrice was staring at her hands. She didn't look up. She didn't answer. But I saw her fingers trembling in her lap, and I saw the color drain from her face like water from a cracked glass.
What could that old woman possibly have down there for her?
Gerald said, jerking his chin toward me as if I weren't sitting 6 feet away, as if I were still furniture. Mr. Calloway closed the folder. The will is clear, Mr. Walsh. The items belong to Meredith. That night I lay in my hotel room staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Grandma Estelle had told me on the phone. Thinking about every Sunday call, every cryptic promise, every time she'd said,
"When the time is right."
The time was now. She'd made sure of it. The next morning I drove to Maple Ridge Road alone. I unlocked the basement door with the key Mr. Calloway had given me. I walked down those creaking wooden stairs, past the water heater, past the shelves of canning jars and old paint cans, and there on the third shelf from the bottom, behind a box of Christmas ornaments, sat a shoebox. Written on the lid in my grandmother's handwriting were 2 words, "Burn this." I didn't open it in the basement. I couldn't. Something about the weight of that house, the low ceilings, the hum of the furnace, the ghosts of 100 Sunday dinners seeping through the floorboards made it feel wrong. Whatever was inside that box, I wanted to be somewhere safe when I opened it. Somewhere that belonged to me. I carried the shoebox up the stairs through the living room and out the front door without looking back. I drove to my hotel, locked the door, sat cross-legged on the bed, and placed the box on the comforter in front of me. It was an ordinary shoebox, cream-colored cardboard, slightly yellowed at the edges, the kind that once held a pair of sensible flats from a department store. It weighed almost nothing, and it weighed everything. "Burn this." Grandma Estelle didn't write those words as an instruction. I knew that immediately. She wrote them as a record of what someone had told her to do. Someone had wanted this box destroyed, and she had refused. I lifted the lid. Inside, the contents were arranged with the kind of deliberate care that made my throat tighten. This wasn't a junk drawer. This wasn't a pile of forgotten keepsakes. Everything was layered, ordered, intentional, like a letter, written in objects instead of words. The first item was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Not the one I'd seen in my baby book growing up, the one that listed Gerald and Patrice Walsh as my parents. This was different. This was the original, the paper slightly thicker, the seal slightly older, the typeface slightly different. Under child's name, it read Meredith Ann. Under mother, it read Colleen Marie Walsh. Under father, it read unknown. I read it 3 times. I held it up to the lamp. I turned it over looking for some mistake, some indication that it was a copy or a forgery or a different Meredith Ann. But the date of birth was mine. The hospital was St. Francis in Columbus, the same one listed on the certificate I'd grown up with. The same birthday, the same city, a different mother. Colleen Marie Walsh, the woman in the photograph, the name I'd been forbidden to speak in my parents' house. My aunt. My mother. Beneath the birth certificate was an envelope unsealed containing a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. The handwriting was round and slightly slanted, the kind of penmanship that belongs to someone who took their time with words. It was dated 3 weeks before my birthday.
To my baby,
It began,
I don't know your name yet. I keep trying different ones like Liliana Rose, but nothing feels finished. Maybe when I see your face, I'll know. That's what Mom says. She says you'll tell me who you are just by how you look at me. I want you to know something in case the world doesn't tell you you were wanted. You were not an accident. You were not a mistake. You were the best decision I ever made, even though the timing was terrible and the circumstances were worse. Your father left before I could tell him about you, and I've made peace with that because it means you're mine. Completely, entirely mine. I'm scared. I won't pretend I'm not. I'm 23 and I'm going to be a single mother, and my sister thinks I've ruined my life. But Mom, your grandmother, she says I've just started it. I believe her. If anything happens to me, please make sure my baby knows she was wanted. She was my whole world before she even arrived. All my love always. Colleen.
I put the letter down. I picked it up again. I pressed it against my chest like I could absorb the words through my skin, like I could feel her hand moving across the paper, like I could reach back through 33 years and tell her, I know you wanted me. Beneath the letter was a death certificate. Colleen Marie Walsh, cause of death, postpartum hemorrhage. Date of death, 3 days after mine began. She held me, she named me, she loved me for 3 days, and then she was gone. There were photographs, 6 of them arranged in chronological order. Colleen pregnant, standing in what looked like Grandma Estelle's backyard, one hand on her belly, squinting into the sun. Colleen in a hospital bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a newborn me wrapped in a white blanket. Colleen and Estelle together the baby, between them 3 generations in a single frame. And the last photograph, the one that broke me, was Colleen asleep in the hospital bed, her hand resting on the bassinet beside her. It was dated 2 days before she died. At the bottom of the box was one final envelope, this one sealed with my name written on the front in Grandma Estelle's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands.
My darling Meredith, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found what I've spent 30 years protecting. Your mother was Colleen, my firstborn, the bravest, most stubborn, most loving girl I ever knew. She died 3 days after you were born, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to me until I watched what happened to you afterward. Patrice took you in because I begged her. She was 20 years old, newly married to Gerald, and terrified. Gerald agreed, but he had conditions. No one could ever know. You would carry his name, and Colleen's memory would be erased from the family, like she never existed. He told me to destroy everything. The birth certificate, the photographs, Colleen's letter. He said it would be easier for everyone. He said it every year for 30 years. Burn it. Get rid of it. Let it go. I never did. I never would. I also set aside money for you, $180,000 from Colleen's life insurance policy, placed in a trust that Gerald cannot touch. Mr. Calloway has the details. It's yours. It was always yours. You deserved the truth, Meredith. You deserved to know that you were loved before you even took your first breath. You deserved to know your mother's name. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let them keep you in the dark, but I made sure the light would find you eventually. You are exactly who you were meant to be. All my love forever. Grandma Estelle.
I sat on that hotel bed for hours holding my dead mother's letter against my heart. The mother I never knew I had. The mother who wanted me. The mother who named me before she closed her eyes and never opened them again. And then my phone rang. It was Patrice. She said 5 words that made my blood run cold.
You weren't supposed to find that.
I didn't respond right away. I held the phone against my ear and listened to Patrice breathing shallow, ragged breaths, the kind that come after a long cry or before a confession. I looked at the contents of the shoebox spread across the hotel bed. My mother's letter. My real birth certificate. Grandma Estelle's final words. 30 years of truth laid out on a polyester comforter in a Holiday Inn off the highway.
Meredith?
Patrice's voice cracked.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Gerald called Mr. Calloway. He knows what was in the basement. He knows you have it.
Good. Silence, then very quietly.
Can we talk not on the phone, in person, just you and me?
I almost said no. Every muscle in my body wanted to hang up, drive to the airport, and fly back to Michigan where Marcus was waiting and the world made sense. But I'd spent my entire life running from a truth I didn't even know existed. I was done running. Tomorrow, I said. At Grandma's house, 10 in the morning, just you, not Gerald.
Okay.
I slept for maybe 2 hours that night. I lay in the dark, holding Colleen's letter against my chest, reading it over and over in my mind until the words stopped being words and became something closer to a heartbeat. You were wanted. You were not a mistake. You were my whole world. I called Marcus at midnight. I told him everything. He listened the way Marcus always listens, completely, without interruption, without trying to steer the conversation toward a solution. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? He asked. Like I've been living in someone else's house my entire life, and I just found the front door. Then walk through it, he said. I'll be here when you get to the other side. The next morning I drove to Maple Ridge Road for what I knew might be the last time. The bungalow looked smaller than I remembered, the way childhood places always do when you return with adult eyes. The paint was peeling on the shutters. The bird feeder in the front yard was empty. Without Grandma Estelle, the house was already forgetting itself. Patrice was sitting on the porch steps when I arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her hair was pulled back loosely, no makeup, wearing a cardigan I recognized from 10 years ago. She looked older than 53. She looked like a woman who'd been carrying something so long her spine had curved around it. I sat down beside her, not close, not far, just beside her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. A cardinal landed on the empty bird feeder, looked around, and flew away.
Her name was Colleen.
Patrice said finally, not looking at me, looking at the bird that was already gone. I know.
She was my older sister, 3 years older. She was everything. I wasn't brave, loud, stubborn, the kind of person who walked into a room and rearranged it just by being there. Mom adored her. Everyone adored her.
Patrice paused. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white.
She got pregnant at 23. The father was a man she'd been seeing for about a year, some musician passing through Columbus. When she told him he disappeared, just gone. No forwarding address, no phone call, nothing. Colleen didn't care. She said she didn't need him. She said she'd raise the baby alone and Mom would help and everything would be fine.
Patrice's voice thinned.
And it was fine. The pregnancy was fine. The delivery was fine. She held you, Meredith. She held you and she named you and she sang to you for 3 days. And then...
She stopped. She pressed both hands against her mouth and breathed through her fingers.
Postpartum hemorrhage. They couldn't stop the bleeding. Mom was in the waiting room when they came out and told her. I was at home. Gerald and I had been married for 8 months. I got the call at 6 a.m.
I sat very still. I could hear the wind moving through Grandma Estelle's empty garden, rustling the dried stalks of last year's tomato plants.
Mom brought you home from the hospital.
Patrice continued.
She was destroyed, completely destroyed. But she held you like nothing else in the world mattered. She came to our house and put you in my arms and said, "This is Colleen's daughter. She needs a mother, please."
And Gerald?
Gerald said yes, but he had rules. No one outside the family could know. We'd file new paperwork. You'd be listed as our biological child, and Colleen's name would never be mentioned again. He said it would be easier, cleaner. He said people would talk if they knew, and he didn't want his family to be the subject of gossip.
That's not why I said. Patrice opened her eyes and looked at me, really looked at me.
No.
She whispered.
That's not why. He couldn't love you, Meredith. He tried, or maybe he didn't try. I don't know anymore. But every time he looked at you, he saw Colleen's choice. He saw a child that wasn't his. He saw a reminder that his family was built on a secret. And instead of dealing with that, he just shut you out.
And you let him. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. I said it the way you'd say the sky is blue or the coffee is cold. Patrice flinched anyway.
Yes,
she said.
I let him. I was 20 years old and I was scared of him and I was grieving my sister and I didn't know how to be your mother and Colleen's sister at the same time. So I became neither. I became the woman who made cakes and sent cards and never said the right thing at the right time.
She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand.
I loved you, Meredith. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I loved you every single day and I failed you every single day and I have to live with both of those things.
I didn't say it's okay. It wasn't okay. 30 years of silence is not something you forgive on a porch step on a Wednesday morning. But I didn't say I hate you either. Because looking at Patrice in that moment, I didn't see a villain. I saw a woman who'd been trapped between her husband's shame and her mother's secret, and who'd chosen the path of least resistance until the path became a prison. The front door opened behind us. Gerald stood in the doorway, his face tight, his eyes locked on the shoebox I'd brought with me.
I told your grandmother to destroy that,
he said.
I told her 100 times.
I looked up at him. She didn't listen.
Give it back, Meredith. That box has caused nothing but problems. It should have been burned years ago.
I stood up, I held the shoebox against my side, and I said the only thing I needed to say. Her name was Colleen and she loved me. Then I walked to my car, placed the shoebox on the passenger seat, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. Marcus was standing in the driveway when I pulled up to our apartment in Grand Rapids. I don't know how he knew exactly when I'd arrive. Maybe he'd been standing there for an hour. Maybe he'd been watching the road since morning. It didn't matter. He opened my car door, saw the shoebox on the passenger seat, saw my face, and didn't ask a single question. He just pulled me into his chest and held me there while the engine ticked and cooled and the neighbor's sprinkler swept back and forth across the lawn like a metronome counting out the seconds of a life that had just been completely rewritten. We went inside. He made coffee. I spread the contents of the shoebox across our kitchen table, the same table where we ate breakfast every morning, where we paid bills and played cards and argued about whose turn it was to call the landlord about the leaky faucet. And now on that table lay the entire truth of who I was. Marcus read everything. The birth certificate, Colleen's letter, Grandma Estelle's final note. He studied the photographs one by one, holding them carefully by the edges, the way I had, like they were made of something more fragile than paper. When he got to the picture of Colleen in the hospital bed, the one where her hand was resting on my bassinet, he set it down gently and pressed his fingers against his eyes. "She looks just like you," he said. "I know. No, I mean she has your exact expression. That thing you do when you're concentrating. That little crease between your eyebrows." I picked up the photograph and looked again. He was right. She had the crease. For 3 days, I didn't do anything. I didn't call Patrice. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't make plans or decisions or grand gestures. I went to work, came home and sat with the truth, like you'd sit with a fever, patiently, uncomfortably, knowing it had to run its course before anything could get better. On the 4th day, Gerald made his move. Mr. Calloway called me at 7 in the morning. His voice was apologetic but steady. "Meredith, I want you to know that your stepfather has retained an attorney to challenge the trust your grandmother established. He's claiming the life insurance funds were misappropriated and should have been included in the general estate." "Can he do that?" "He can try, but your grandmother was a meticulous woman. The trust was established 17 years ago, fully notarized with independent witnesses. She anticipated this. She told me once, and I remember her exact words.
Gerald will fight it when the time comes. Make sure it's airtight.
It is. His challenge will fail." I thanked Mr. Calloway and hung up. I wasn't surprised. Gerald had spent 30 years trying to erase Colleen from existence. Of course he'd try to erase her money too. It was never about the $180,000. It was about control. It was about making sure that nothing from Colleen's life survived to contradict the story he'd built. He failed. The challenge was dismissed within 3 weeks. But Gerald wasn't finished. He called Derek next, and whatever version of the story he told, it worked. My phone rang on a Saturday afternoon. I saw Derek's name on the screen and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not sadness, but a strange, tired curiosity. I hadn't spoken to my brother in almost 4 years.
Hey,
He said. No warmth, no greeting. Just the single syllable of a man who'd been instructed to make a call and wanted it over with. "Hey, Derek."
so Dad told me what's going on, about the basement stuff, about the money.
"Did he tell you what was actually in the box?"
He said Grandma left you some documents that don't mean what you think they mean. He said you're trying to claim you're not really his daughter, so you can take a bigger share of the estate.
I almost laughed. Almost. "Derek, I'm not trying to take anything. Grandma left me a trust from Colleen's life insurance. That's it. I haven't asked for a penny more."
Who's Colleen?
He didn't know. Gerald had kept the secret so completely that Derek, my brother, or rather my cousin, had never even heard the name. The woman who gave birth to me, the woman whose death reshaped this entire family, was so thoroughly erased that her own nephew didn't know she'd existed. "Colleen was Mom's older sister," I said. "She's my biological mother. She died 3 days after I was born. Patrice and Gerald adopted me. That's the truth that was in the box." Long silence. I could hear Derek breathing.
That's not, Dad wouldn't lie about something like that.
He didn't lie, Derek. He just made sure nobody ever asked. More silence. Then in a voice I barely recognized, thin, uncertain, stripped of the easy confidence Gerald had spent 20 years building into him, he said,
So you're not even really my sister.
"I'm your cousin, biologically. But I grew up in the same house, ate at the same table, and slept down the hall from you for 18 years. You can decide what that means to you." He hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a while, looking at nothing. Marcus came in from the other room and put his hand on my shoulder. "Derek." "Yeah. Bad. Empty." I made my decisions that week. Quietly, clearly, the way Grandma Estelle would have wanted. I would not sue Gerald. I would not fight for a share of the house or any additional inheritance. I would not write angry letters or make public accusations or try to punish anyone for 30 years of silence. That wasn't who Colleen raised me to be, even if she only had 3 days to do it. But I was done. I was done with Gerald's house and Gerald's rules and Gerald's version of who I was. I cut contact completely, no calls, no messages, no holiday cards. The door was closed. Patrice was different. She called me 2 weeks after the confrontation crying before I even said hello. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said,
"I want to be in your life if you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try."
I told her I needed time. She said she'd wait. I used the trust money to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a small house on the east side of Grand Rapids, 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard, a kitchen with enough counter space to make blueberry pancakes. Our first real home. And then one evening I started looking for Colleen. Not in the shoebox, I'd memorized every item in it by then. I searched for the people who'd known her. I found 2 college friends through an old alumni directory. I found a former coworker. And from them, piece by piece, I learned something that stopped me cold. Colleen had been a nurse, a volunteer nurse at a free clinic in Columbus working weekends while she finished her degree. She'd wanted to go into emergency medicine. She'd wanted to help people in crisis. I was a nurse. I worked in emergency care. I'd chosen the same path as the mother I never knew I had, without anyone ever telling me she'd walked it first. 6 months after I left Ohio, a letter arrived at my new house. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, Colleen in her nursing uniform, standing in front of a hospital entrance, smiling. On the back, in faded ink, my grandmother had written 5 words.
She would have been so proud.
The photograph of Colleen in her nursing uniform sat on my nightstand for 3 months before I found the right frame for it. Not because I was particular about frames, because I kept picking it up and holding it instead of putting it away. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift, exhausted, smelling like antiseptic and coffee, and I'd sit on the edge of the bed and look at her face. Her smile. The way she stood with one hand on her hip, slightly tilted like she was about to say something funny. The crease between her eyebrows. Marcus caught me one night sitting in the dark, at 2 a.m, the photograph in my lap. "Are you okay?" he asked from the doorway, his voice soft with sleep. "I'm talking to my mom," I said. And then I laughed because it sounded crazy, and then I cried because it didn't. He sat beside me. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around my shoulder and let me hold the photograph until my breathing steadied and the room stopped spinning. That was the year everything changed, not in the dramatic, explosive way my childhood had taught me to expect, but in the slow, steady way that real healing happens. Like a bone resetting. You don't notice it day by day. You just wake up one morning and realize you can carry weight you couldn't carry before. In September, I found out I was pregnant. I was at work when the test confirmed it. Ironic being a nurse who'd helped dozens of women through this exact moment and still standing in the hospital bathroom with shaking hands and a plus sign on a plastic stick. I called Marcus from the break room. "We're going to be parents," I said. He was silent for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Our kid is going to know exactly who they are from day one. No secrets, no boxes, no silence." "No silence," I repeated, and I meant it with every cell in my body. The pregnancy was uncomplicated, which felt like a gift I hadn't earned and couldn't stop being grateful for. Every checkup, every ultrasound, every heartbeat on the monitor, I held my breath waiting for something to go wrong because the woman who gave me life had lost hers in this exact process. My doctor, a calm, silver-haired woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor, noticed my anxiety at my second appointment. "Is there a family history I should know about?" she asked. I told her about Colleen, about the postpartum hemorrhage, about the 3 days. Dr. Okafor listened carefully, made notes, and looked at me with steady eyes. "Medicine has come a long way in 30 years, she said. "We're going to take excellent care of you, both of you." She kept that promise. My daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in April, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with dark auburn hair, and a cry so loud, the nurse in the next room laughed and said, "That one's got opinions already." Marcus held her first. His hands were trembling and he kept saying, hi there, hi," over and over, like he was learning a new language. When they placed her in my arms, I looked at her face, scrunched and red and furious at the brightness of the world, and I knew her name. I'd known it for months, but I waited until I saw her to be sure. "Colleen," and I said, "Colleen Estelle." Marcus nodded. He already knew. I held my daughter against my chest and whispered to her the words her grandmother had written 33 years ago in a letter she never got to deliver in person. "You were wanted. You were not a mistake. You are my whole world." Patrice came to visit when Colleen was 2 weeks old. She drove from Ohio alone. Gerald didn't come, and I didn't ask about him. She stood in the doorway of our house, holding a gift bag with tissue paper spilling out the top, and when she saw the baby, she pressed her hand over her mouth and cried.
"She looks like her Patrice whispered. "She looks just like Colleen."
I know. Patrice sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, a chair Marcus had built from a kit he ordered online, sanding the edges smooth over 3 weekends, and held the baby while I stood in the doorway watching. She sang something soft, something I didn't recognize, and when she saw me listening, she said,
"Colleen used to sing this when she was pregnant with you. She'd sit on Mom's porch and sing to her belly."
It was the first time Patrice had volunteered a memory of Colleen without being asked. It was a small thing. But small things are how trust rebuilds itself, one offered memory at a time, one open door at a time, one visit at a time. We weren't healed. I want to be honest about that. Patrice and I didn't fall into each other's arms and become the mother and daughter we'd never been. We were two women standing in the wreckage of a 30-year lie trying to figure out which pieces were worth salvaging. Some days it felt possible, some days it didn't. But she kept showing up, and I kept opening the door, and that was enough for now. Gerald never called. Derek sent a text message when Colleen was born, just 2 words.
Congrats, Meredith.
And nothing after. I didn't chase them, I didn't mourn them either. I'd spent my childhood mourning the love of people who were standing right in front of me, and I was finished with that. The shoebox sits on the bookshelf in our living room now between a row of novels and a framed photograph of Grandma Estelle holding sunflowers. I didn't hide it. I didn't display it like a trophy. It's just there, part of the story, part of the house, part of who I am. Colleen's letter is inside, along with the photographs, the birth certificate, and Grandma Estelle's final note. Sometimes when the baby is sleeping and the house is quiet, I open the lid and read my mother's words again. Not because I've forgotten them, because they feel like a conversation I get to keep having. Marcus asked me once, a few months after the baby was born, "Are you okay?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "I'm not okay," I said. "I'm better. I'm finally whole." The people who love you will find ways to reach you, even from the grave. Truth doesn't expire. It waits in shoeboxes, in letters, in the quiet stubbornness of a grandmother who refused to let your story be erased. You don't need everyone to love you. You just need the ones who do to love you honestly. And sometimes the family you were born into is not the family you were meant for, but the love that made you will always find its way home. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered a family secret that changed how you saw yourself? And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribe. I'll be here. Thank you for listening, all the way to the end.